My daughter didn't see me walk in. She was standing near the reception desk in a gray blazer, phone pressed to one ear, laughing softly at something my son-in-law had said. The carpet was deep burgundy. The air smelled of printer toner and someone's reheated coffee. A brass placard on the front desk read Ashford Title and Trust in raised letters, and below it, in smaller print, the date, September 17th. The day my husband's studio was scheduled to change hands without my knowledge, my consent, or my presence. I found a chair near the window and sat down. When she finally turned and saw me, the laughter stopped. She crossed the room in quick, measured steps, keeping her voice low. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "Same thing you are," I said. She leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume, something sharp and floral I didn't recognize. "This is just a formality. You shouldn't have to deal with this." "A formality," I said, "selling 43 years of my life. How convenient." Something shifted in her expression. Not guilt, not yet. More like the look of someone recalculating a route after an unexpected obstacle. She went back to my son-in-law. I watched them whisper. I watched him glance at me and then look away. I kept my hands folded on my handbag and waited. The story really starts 6 weeks earlier, the morning I found the contract. I had been sorting mail at the kitchen table, the same table where my husband Carl and I used to drink coffee every Sunday, with the window cracked and the birds loud in the oak tree out back. Most of it was nothing. A water bill, a grocery circular, a flyer for a senior wellness center. But one envelope was thicker than the rest. Cream-colored, with my daughter's return address in the corner, though she hadn't mentioned sending anything. Inside was a 47-page purchase and sale agreement. The property listed at the top was 119 Wharton Mill Road, my address, and paper-clipped to the first page, facing backward as though someone had hoped I might miss it, was a cover letter from a development firm called Ridgeline Properties, LLC. I read it 3 times before my hands began to shake. 2 years earlier, when I had my gallbladder out and was slow to recover, my daughter had suggested she help with the paperwork. Bills, insurance forms, the kind of thing Carl had always managed and that I was still learning to navigate on my own after losing him. She brought documents to the hospital. She explained everything quickly, in the soft voice she used when she thought I was fragile. Financial power of attorney. Just temporary. Just a precaution, in case something came up while I was recovering. I trusted her. She was my daughter. I thought about that often in the weeks that followed. The particular quality of trust that makes you stop asking questions. The way I had taken the pen without reading past the first paragraph. The way I had handed over something I didn't fully understand because I was tired and in pain, and she was my daughter. Carl and I had bought the property in 1981, the same year we got married. He was a woodworker, fine furniture, small sculptures, the occasional piece commissioned by local galleries who had started paying attention to his work. I made ceramics, bowls, vases, tile work, sometimes pieces that ended up in strangers' living rooms, and made them feel something they couldn't quite name, which is the best a maker can hope for. We built the studio ourselves, the 2 of us and Carl's brother, over one long summer, with lumber we milled from the back acreage and a concrete floor we poured on a Saturday in August when it was too hot to do anything sensible. The roof leaked for 3 years. The kiln was secondhand and ran 15 degrees hotter than the dial said. But we made it work. We always made it work. That was the truth of that place. Not that it was perfect, but that we had kept choosing it, kept patching it, kept showing up. My daughter grew up running between the house and the studio, clay on her shoes, sawdust in her hair. She knew the sound of Carl's lathe the way some children know the sound of a television. Background, constant, reassuring. She used to sit on the workbench and watch me center clay on the wheel, asking questions I never had the patience to answer as well as she deserved. Somewhere in her 20s, she stopped asking questions altogether. I'm not sure when it began. Not a single moment, but a gradual dimming. The way a candle goes out not all at once, but degree by degree, until you look up and realize the room is dark. She moved to the city, married my son-in-law, who worked in commercial real estate, and had opinions about property values and carrying costs that he shared freely and without invitation. The visits became shorter, then less frequent, then mostly holidays, and even those had the texture of obligation. Careful conversation that stayed on the surface. My son-in-law checking his phone under the table. My daughter counting the hours until she could politely leave. She started talking about the studio when Carl was barely 6 months gone. Not selling, not directly, just wondering aloud. The upkeep. The property taxes on acreage she called underutilized. The tools sitting idle now that he wasn't there to use them. Did I really need all that space for just myself? I told her yes. She heard something else. The brochures started arriving. Not nursing homes. She was careful about that. Active living communities. 1-bedroom garden apartments with granite countertops and shuttle service to the pharmacy. She sent 3 in a single envelope with a post-it note that said, "Simply exploring options for you. Love." I put them in the trash without opening them past the covers. When she called to ask if I'd looked them over, I told her the truth, and she sighed. Not a large sigh, not theatrical, just the quiet kind that says she was already very tired of dealing with me. What I didn't know, what I had no reason to suspect, was that she had already begun moving the pieces. The financial power of attorney gave her authority over property transactions. She had retained her own attorney. She had contacted Ridgeline Properties. She had accepted an offer. She just hadn't told me. The morning after I found the contract, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a woman named Rhonda at my bank, who had been managing my accounts for 4 years and knew my voice as well as I knew hers. I told her what I had found. She listened without a word. Then she said, "Give me 10 minutes." She called back in 8. She had flagged the account, blocked outgoing transfers above a nominal amount, and placed a notation requiring my in-person authorization for any major transactions going forward. "She's listed as co-authority," Rhonda said carefully. "I know," I said. "That's about to change." The second call was to an attorney named Anton Briggs, whose name I'd gotten from a woman at my church who had dealt with something similar not 2 years ago. His office was on the 2nd floor of a downtown building that smelled of old wood and central heat. He was younger than I expected, mid-40s, methodical. With reading glasses he took off and put back on while I talked. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he set his pen down and said, "This is more common than it should be. The good news is that you're still legally competent. The transaction hasn't closed and you have clear standing to revoke. Can we revoke it before September 17th? He looked at the calendar on his desk. "We'll file today." "Good. And I want to be at that closing." He looked at me over the reading glasses. "You want to be there in person." "I want her to understand," I said, "that I was never as lost as she thought I was." He was quiet for a moment, tapping his pen once against the legal pad. "All right," he said, "I'll be there with you." I didn't sleep much in the days that followed. I walked the studio at night, running my hands over Carl's workbench, the smooth-worn handles of his tools hanging exactly where he'd left them. The smell in that place, linseed oil and sawdust, and something else, something that had no name but was made entirely of years, settled around me the way it always had, like an answer to a question I hadn't asked aloud. I pressed my palm flat against the old doorframe one night and said, "I'm not letting go." I didn't specify who I was talking to. Carl, the house, myself, maybe all 3. My granddaughter called me the night before the closing. She lives out in Portland, calls more often than her mother does, sends postcards with small drawings in the margins, birds, coffee cups, cartoons of her cat. She's 25 and studying textile design and has never once made me feel like a burden. She picked up on the second ring when I called back. "Hey, Graham, you okay? You sound like something's on your mind." "I'm all right," I said. "I just wanted to hear your voice." We talked about her work deadline, a craft market she was excited about, a roommate situation that was quietly driving her up the wall. Ordinary life, moving forward the way it does regardless of what else is happening. She didn't know about the closing. I hadn't told her. Some betrayals are too heavy to hand down across a generation. After we said goodnight, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The clock on the wall, the one Carl found at an estate sale in Vermont in 1989 and spent an entire weekend restoring, ticked in its slow, patient way. Outside, the first frost of the season had glazed the grass silver. In the morning, I dressed carefully. Dark navy trousers. The cream blouse I'd worn to Carl's retirement dinner and kept wearing ever since because it made me feel steady. simple earrings, hair pinned back. I made tea, sat at the table with my folder, and waited until it was time to leave. The folder held the revocation of financial power of attorney, notarized and filed with the county clerk 3 days prior, effective immediately. A letter from Anton confirming my legal standing to halt the transaction, and the original deed to 119 Wharton Mill Road, with Carl's name and mine side by side in the typeface of a different era. Our signatures at the bottom in the handwriting of two people who were 28 and 26 and had no clear idea what was ahead of them, only that they were facing it together. I drove to Ashford Title and Trust alone. I arrived 8 minutes early. The closing agent, a tall man with reading glasses and a practiced calm, stepped into the lobby and asked if everyone was ready to begin. My daughter said yes. I said there was a complication he needed to be aware of. Anton walked through the front door right on schedule. My daughter's face went very still. Anton presented the revocation to the closing agent, who read it once and then a second time without speaking. My son-in-law stood up from his chair. My daughter pressed 2 fingers to her temple. "This transaction cannot proceed," Anton said. "Under the original authorization, the financial power of attorney was revoked as of 3 days ago. My client is present today to make clear that she does not consent to this sale, and that no sale of this property will occur without her direct, explicit, and documented agreement." The room was quiet. My daughter looked at me across the lobby. I looked back. I did not look away. "Mom," she said. Her voice was different. The crisp edges had gone soft in a way I hadn't heard from her in years. "Not in here," I said. "Outside." She followed me to the parking lot. The October air was cold, the particular cold that smells of dead leaves and the approaching winter. She stopped a few feet away from me, arms crossed over her chest. "I thought you wouldn't come," she said. "You counted on it," I said. "That's not the same thing." She looked at the pavement. My son-in-law had stayed inside, which was probably the smartest thing he'd done all day. "I was going to tell you once it was done," she said. "I didn't want you to have to go through the process." "You mean the process of deciding what happens to my own home?" She flinched. "Your father's tools are in that studio," I said. "His lathe, the chisels he used for 30 years, the wooden box he made me for my birthday in 1987 that is still on my shelf exactly where I put it. You looked at that and saw weight I needed to put down. I look at it and see the only place left where I can still be close to him." She was quiet for a long moment. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "I didn't know that," she said. "You didn't ask." The truth of that sat between us like something physical. "I think," she said slowly, "I convinced myself that taking care of things was the same as caring for you, that making decisions was the same as showing up. It isn't. I know that now." I studied her face, the exhaustion in it, the shame, and underneath both of those, something that looked like the little girl who used to climb up onto Carl's workbench and pepper me with questions I never answered well enough. She was still in there. I had missed her. "You stopped seeing me as a person," I said. "I became something to manage, a problem with a practical solution." "That's not how I thought of you." Maybe not in those words, but that's what the contract said. She nodded slowly. It cost her something. I could see it. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now I go home. Anton handles the legal side, and you decide what kind of daughter you still have the chance to be." She said she was sorry. Not the rehearsed kind, just those 2 words, plain and a little raw. "Good," I said. "Act like it." I drove home with the radio off. The road from town to Wharton Mill runs through farmland and timber, the kind of countryside that changes every season if you know what to look for. The maples along the fence line had gone orange overnight. A hawk sat on a telephone pole and watched me pass. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment before getting out. The studio door was visible from where I parked. The weathered cedar siding. The window Carl had installed, slightly crooked, and we had never bothered to fix because it caught the afternoon light just so. A wren's nest, tucked under the eave from the previous spring, still holding its shape. I went inside the house, put the kettle on, and called my granddaughter. She picked up fast. "Graham, I've been thinking about you all day. What happened?" I told her everything. The The POA, the contract, the morning at Ashford title, her mother's face in the parking lot. I told it plainly, without editorializing. The way you tell someone the truth when you trust them to receive it carefully. When I finished, there was a pause, and then she said, "You are something else, you know that." I laughed. It surprised me how easy it was, how unguarded. That's not exactly what I expected you to say. What did you expect? I don't know. Something more measured. Graham, she said, you revoked a legal document, hired a lawyer, showed up alone, and stopped a real estate transaction in its tracks at 68 years old. I'm not going to be measured about that. We talked until my tea went cold. After we hung up, I sat in the kitchen with the clock ticking and the frost beginning to form again on the grass outside, and I felt, for the first time in a very long time, like myself. My daughter didn't call for 5 days. I didn't reach out first. When she did call, she was careful and quiet. She said she understood she had overstepped. She said she was withdrawing from the agreement with Ridgeline. She asked if she could come visit sometime if I was willing. I told her yes, but on my terms. No paperwork, no printouts, no conversations that were really just decisions she'd already made dressed up as suggestions. She came 3 weeks later on a Saturday without my son-in-law, carrying a small pot of chrysanthemums from the farmer's market and a jar of honey from a roadside stand she'd stopped at on the drive over. She stood at the door without speaking, and I stepped back and let her in. We didn't talk about the title company, not right away. We sat at the kitchen table with tea, and she asked what I was working on, whether I'd used the kiln recently, what the new piece looked like. Real questions. Questions that wanted real answers. I showed her. We walked to the studio together for the first time in years. She stood in the doorway the way she used to as a small child, just inside the threshold, taking in the space. Carl's tools in their places, my wheel in the corner, the shelves of work in progress. The particular quality of light that came through the improperly installed window. I forgot how it smells in here, she said quietly. Like him. Yes. She stood there for a while. Then she said, I think I avoided it, this place, after he died, because walking in here meant admitting he was really gone. I know. But you kept coming back. Every day, I said, because he's still here in the way that matters, in what we built. In what I'm still making. She looked at me for a long moment. Her eyes were wet, and this time she didn't wipe them away quickly. We went back to the kitchen and I put the kettle on again. We are not what we were. I don't know that we ever will be, that easy, unguarded closeness of years ago, when she was small and the world was a simpler place. But we are something. Something honest, at least. Something built on ground we can both see clearly. She calls once a week now. Not the check-in calls of before, brief and perfunctory, one box to tick in a long list. These are longer. She asks what I'm working on. She tells me about her week, real things, not just the surface. Last month, she drove out on a Sunday, and we made soup from the last of the garden tomatoes. The way I used to do with her when she was 8, and believed that helping in the kitchen was the best possible use of an afternoon. She stood at my stove and stirred the way I taught her. And at some point she said quietly, I'm glad you showed up that day. I didn't answer right away. I thought about all the years I had made myself smaller to keep the peace. All the times I had nodded and let things go. Because the alternative felt like too much trouble. I thought about what it had cost me, and what it might have cost more if I hadn't walked through the door at Ashford Title and Trust on a cold September morning, with a folder full of documents and a clear sense of what I was not willing to lose. I am too, I said. She smiled. It was the real one, the one that had always been the best thing about her face. That evening, after she drove home, I walked out to the studio one last time before dark. The late light came through Carl's backwards window, the way it always does. Long gold streaks across the concrete floor, reaching toward the shelves where the work waits. His tools hanging in their places. The small wooden box on the shelf beside my wheel, the smell of the place, unchanged, reliable as breathing. I sat on the stool in the middle of it all and stayed for a while. I didn't win anything in the traditional sense. No courtroom, no judgment, no formal acknowledgement that what was done to me was wrong. I simply stopped something from happening that never should have been set in motion. But I kept the studio. I kept Carl's tools and the backwards window and the wren's nest under the eave. I kept the mornings when I sit down at the wheel and put my hands in the clay and feel, for that hour at least, that I am exactly where I am supposed to be. And out in Portland, my granddaughter is making things with her hands. The way I made things, the way Carl made things. Not because anyone told her to, but because it's simply who she is. That's enough. That has always been enough. I turned off the light and walked back across the yard to the house, and the gate at the garden path creaked the way it had creaked for 30 years. And I did not hurry, and I did not look back.